Hello again. Throughout the pandemic, we in Britain have been regularly assured that the government is following the science. In other words, the boffins come up with their scientific predictions and the government act upon them in introducing lockdowns and so on. Over the weekend, a document emerged from the government's Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies, which suggested that the Omicron variant of COVID-19 might end up killing 6,000 people a day in this country. As readers will probably also know, yesterday's figure was just 45 deaths for the entire country of people who died with COVID. So that would be quite an increase from 45 to 6,000. Even at the height of the pandemic earlier this year in January, fewer than 2,000 people died in the worst single day on January the 20th. This figure of 6,000 was the top of the range for possible deaths, with a lower figure of just 600 being also mentioned, and yet it was 6,000 which was publicised. Both are very sketchy guesses, so why was it the very highest which became the one that people talked about? Professor Graham Medley, who is in charge of the modelling which SAGE produces, that's the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies set up by the government, is ultimately responsible for figures of this kind. And he was defending his work on Twitter at the weekend. Somebody from the bank JP Morgan tweeted and pointed out that these assumptions were based on the idea that the Omicron variant was as deadly as Delta, and that if experience in South Africa suggests that it's milder, then maybe some modelling should have been done on that assumption, rather than the assumption that Omicron is as deadly as any other variant. If it is actually less lethal, then the figure of 600 deaths a day is far more realistic. The editor of the Spectator magazine, Fraser Nelson, asked why SAGE had not emphasised the lower figure rather than the higher one, and received the astonishing response from the SAGE expert of what would be the point of that. He went on to say that decision makers are only interested in situations where decisions have to be made. He then said, and this is the chair of the SAGE Modelling Committee speaking, and his answer is still there on Twitter where all can see it, we generally model what we have been asked to model. As if that's not revealing enough, he continued, there is a dialogue in which policymakers discuss with the modellers what they need to inform with their policy. Just savour this for a moment. We all thought that the scientists were working away independently and producing their results, which they then handed to the politicians in government whose job it is to make policy. It appears from what Professor Medley says that this is not at all how it works. It seems that the policymakers tell the scientists what sort of predictions they are interested in, and that is what is produced for them. In this case, it seems that the British government didn't want to see predictions about what the situation might be like if the Omicron variant were to be milder than previous variants. They only asked for predictions based on it being likely to prove as deadly as others, such as Delta. Now, this only happened over the weekend, and so it may yet be that Professor Medley issues a retraction or says that he was misunderstood. I suspect, though, that whatever happens now, this is going to prove something of a watershed in the attitude of ordinary people who have been told that the politicians are following the science. It looks as though there's a little more to it than many of us previously believed. I will remark, as usual, that I am not an anti-vaxxer nor a conspiracy theorist, And I believe that COVID is an infectious disease which is quite a menace to old people and those who have health problems. I also think that vaccines are the best way to tackle the spread of this virus. At the same time, I think that the measures taken by the government to combat this disease are having undesirable side effects, ranging from harm to the education of children to the inability of people to have treatment for other illnesses such as cancer and heart disease. If it should prove to be the case that the government have only been asking SAGE to produce scary predictions rather than ones that are less frightening, then that is quite a serious matter and something that needs to be looked into. But we'll have to see what the next few days bring. I'm guessing that there will be a frantic effort now to row back on what the chair of SAGE's modelling committee said over the weekend on Twitter.